I'm going to teach you how to light paint composite with an LED string from Target. Alright, yo, what's going on, guys? So today is exciting. I have a fun plan. I'm basically going to be doing a light painting composite where I'm going to try and play around and get some shapes that look like hearts and figure out how to incorporate that nicely with a self-portrait. Let's begin setting up, shall we? Okay, so I don't have a lot of room in my little studio space here, but I got everything set up. I got my tripod set up pretty much at the height I want it to be. I'm going to tweak it in a second. I got my wireless remote, I got my nice little RGB light, which I'll be using for the portrait session first, and then I've got my nice little string lights, my string LED lights, if you guys can see that, nice up and close, that I got from Target and just taped together the battery pack for the light painting portion. So let's get into the portraits. So for the portraits, all you want to do is find a reference object. For me, I'm going to be using this light stand, and I want to put it exactly where I'll be standing so that then I can get focus on that and then stand exactly where that was. I want to then make sure that my lights are correct, and then all I'm doing now is checking that I have my receiver on and everything else is good to go, so then I can start with the portraits. So that's looking like what I want. Now my idea is to actually start out by staying in the same pose, holding this where my heart is, because that's sort of where the heart that I'm going to light paint composite is going to be coming out of. And then that way I have this light here first, and I'll have my hand right next to it as well, so then I can basically composite this hand in, and I'm going to switch hands and have my other hand in like this, because I'm going to try and make a hole in my chest where the heart will be. Okay, perfect. So that is exactly what I was looking for this one. Now, I'm just going to repeat the process for the other ideas that I have and change the lighting around, and yeah, so just watch a nice little time lapse of that going on. Now, whenever you're thinking about changing the lighting around and everything, make sure that your idea that you're doing is basically matching the light. So for instance, if you have something in front of you, you want to keep the light in front of you. So all of the portraits are taken now. Now we get to the fun part. The light painting. We're getting on to the light painting section now. This light's gonna go off, this light's gonna go off, and I'm only gonna have this LED string light. Now, when you're doing this, whenever you're doing with only the LED string light, what you really gotta pay attention to is the type of shapes that you want to be adding in and how they are in space. So for instance, if I have like the heart like this close to the camera, correct, right? If I have the heart that close, I need a line to come this close to the camera as well. So I need to either start here and come back, or I need to finish close to the camera if I want a shape that comes to the heart, if that makes any sense. Just try and figure out where you are in space and exactly how it's going to interact. There are also a few other things that you can get. That's why I have a string attached to this. This is technically an orb tool. I like to get clean plates of single rings in every direction, so straight on like this. I like to do some like this. I like to do some like this. I like to do some over my head, but then you also get these angles. That way then you can composite those in however you'd like as well. For the heart's a little different because you have to draw this side of the heart first, then you come back to the top, and then you draw little rings because I'm going to be trying to make it a 3D looking heart. My settings are bulb mode, f4.5, and ISO 100. Now make sure that whenever you're doing these light painting things that you want to have a reference point. For instance, I'm using the tripod that's exactly in front of me so that then I have a point to start and to stop. That way I get the most precise shape that I can get. Another good thing I like to do is wrap the string around my finger, and then when I start, I just spin it off and move back. It'll also work really well if you just do it from the top to the bottom at a weird angle. Alright, that finishes it for the light painting section. Let's get to post-processing. Now that we're in post-processing, make sure that you have everything all organized, pick the photos that you want, and let's get them into Lightroom. So you want to click them, import them all into Lightroom. That way then we can now do our base edits to them. Whenever you're thinking about doing your base edits, start with your portraits first so that you can get those nice and clean looking, and I love, absolutely love, to use the previous button. So for now, all I'm doing is just selecting everything. I click on sync so that then I can go into the lens corrections and click both of those, and then I turn my sync right back off. That way now everything is lens corrected how I would like it to be. Now I turn the sync off, go back in, And now I do my basic adjustments for this. I wanted to add a little bit more contrast, make it a little bit moodier, and then go in, fix my highlights, make sure that they're not too bright, make sure it's not too dark either, raise the shadows like I usually do, that way I get retain most of those details, bring up the whites, bring down the blacks, adding in that contrast once again. Then we go in with the texture, add a little bit of texture, bring the clarity down, make it a little bit dreamier, and make the skin smoother as well. Then I add a little bit of dehaze just to make it a little darker again. Then we come into our curves. With the curves, what I usually go for is I want to make sure that the highlights aren't too bright, and it also makes the colors a little more pastel-like, so I like to go for that. Then I come in with the actual S-curve, give it a little more contrast, and then lift the shadows just to give it that little bit of cinematic look. Then I'll come into the red just to add a little bit more aqua to it, because this is just another way to increase the colors that you'd like to see. For me, I was going for a little more pinks with a little bit more of purple and blue in the shadows. Now we'll go in and actually tweak the regular colors. For this, I wanted it to be all pink because that was the only color that really came to mind with hearts. So I brought the hue of the reds down to pink, brought the saturation down a little bit, and then I also started playing with the oranges. I usually like to pull the slider both ways, that way I can see what's going on with the photo. Let's desaturate the oranges in this case. No yellows, no greens. Aquas I wanted to play with, see. Blues, there wasn't really that many in there, but I decided to desaturate it, bring it up a little bit. The purples, I wanted to desaturate a little bit as well, and now here's the important part with the magentas. The magentas, I knew there would be a lot in this photo based off of my RGB light that I have, the MC aperture light. So I just wanted to desaturate that a little bit, that way it really accentuates the pink in my face, and it doesn't bring out too much focus on the background. Now I'll come into the luminance, raise up all the colors that I would like to see more of, and then that way it would also be able to bring out the contrast between the colors as well. Then we'll come in, we'll mask so that then we have the most sharp image that we can, at least in this setting. I'll bring up the luminance a little bit because I was at ISO 640 for this portrait. Now we'll come in, make sure it's level, and after that, that is it. After we start tweaking with the saturation and vibrance. Now the saturation and vibrance is all about your personal preference. It doesn't really matter. Usually I touch them after everything's done. So usually I get one portrait done, and then I come in with previous. I click the previous button on the next portrait, and then that way I can just tweak little settings in order to make everything correct. If I don't like how it looks at first, I will just reset the whole image and then start from scratch again. But now here we go, going through, just hitting previous, doing our little adjustments. That way we have everything how we like it to be. Now, when you get to the light painting, the one most important thing that you want to do is make sure that it is only the shape and your background is perfectly pitch black. That way you can have the easiest time compositing because you can just use blend modes. Now what I'm just doing, I'm raising the clarity, I bring up the contrast, I bring up the shadows just a little bit just to make sure there's nothing there. Normally I would bring them completely all the way down. I bring up the whites and I bring up the blacks a tiny bit just to see what's going on. Then after that, I will usually just go in, make sure that every single photo is correct and the same, because after I get them all the same, then I will export them all. I'll make sure that they're all nice and masked. I'll sync all the settings, and then we go into the exporting. So for the exporting, you want to select all of your photos. You want to go in, File, Export. And when you export them, you want to make sure that you scroll down, double check they're JPEG, perfectly good to go. Then hit that export button, and then wait for it to export. So you'll see up here in the top left it's exporting. You wait for that progress bar to get all the way finished, and then what I like to do after it finishes, I like to go in and I like to take all of those exports and put them into their own new folder, which I usually name Lightpainting Composites. That way when they're in their own folder, they're a lot easier to find. Yep, so now that you've got those in there, I usually go to library, I remove all of them from Lightroom, that way I have less of a cluttered space, and now I go into one of my portraits that I will be using, and I will go click on it. I will right click the image itself, and then go over to edit in Adobe Photoshop, and then you wait for Photoshop to open up your image. Once that image is opened, then what you'll do is you'll copy it. I hit Control J or Command J if you're on Mac to copy it. Then you'll come in and pick out the shapes that you want to initially use in that folder. Then you'll drag and drop into your Photoshop document. We have to wait for all these to load in. Press enter, 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 make sure they're all just cropped the same until they're all in there. Once all of your images are in there, I usually like to turn them all off first. That way then I can go through and see which ones I actually want to use by turning them on and then grouping them together. That way it's so much easier to work with. So now I'll just turn all of them to lighten, that way it's a little easier to work with. I can see exactly what's happening in the image. Now I start turning them off once again, so that way I have less clutter on my screen. So now I'll just go through one by one, usually seeing which one is the best fit, and then I will start to slowly put together the heart itself. Feel free to fully manipulate the shape, so you can stretch it, you can warp it, you can do whatever, however you need to do it to get what you want. Now I'll add a layer mask to the group, that way I can fully layer mask out the shape first. Keep the layer mask like this so that then you can see exactly what you're removing at first. And once you've removed all of the shape that you need to be removing, then you will hit Control I or Command I on Mac to invert that mask. And once you invert that mask, you'll see exactly what you masked out. The reason why I do this is to keep it much cleaner, so that when I add this hue saturation layer and I change the color, the blacks around it don't get affected. But as you can see, there's a little bit of a ring of purple around it, so now what I do is I will come back into that layer mask that we made previously on that group, and I will clean up that layer mask in order to get rid of that extra color spill. Just remember, take your time with this, because if you want it to be the best, you just need to take your time. That's all it is, it just takes time. So now that I have the heart exactly how I would like it, I come in and I bring in the other rings and shapes that I will be using. I'll apply a layer mask out the shape once again. Once I layer mask out the shape, then I'll invert the mask, and then I'll move it exactly where I want it to go. Right now we're going to be starting on a separate photo, and for this photo, it's the same exact process. Just make sure that you layer mask it out, invert that mask. After you invert that mask, then you can group them all together however you'd like. Make sure that you got the exact composition that you like. Change the colors, clean it up, and then apply that same hue saturation to every other shape that you do. Super easy, all you have to do is hold Alt, click on that hue saturation tab, and drag it up to your next one. And then if you want to add that clipping mask, all you need to do is hold Alt on your keyboard and go click in between the hue saturation layer and the layer that you're trying to affect. That's Option on Mac. Now, all I wanted to do with this is just add a little bit of rings. I don't really know exactly where my thought process was going. I just sort of try things and add them. I usually like to add this big ring around as well, just to sort of tie everything together. Make sure that you layer mask out to behind, so you can make it look like it goes behind the subject or in front of the subject. It's all up to you. Now what I'm trying here is I'm adding Gaussian blurs after I copy the layer. That way then I can also layer mask out the Gaussian blur in a certain way so that it actually seems like it's going back in space like it normally would if you had regular lens blur. And this will be a lot of waiting. I will just let you know that now, because usually it is working with large files and a lot of them. Now usually I mask out behind other rings as well so that it seems like they go behind each other. Once you finish masking out and everything, all you have to do is hit Control S or Command S to save it. Then after you save it in Photoshop, go right back into Lightroom and it will import it directly from Photoshop. So you don't have to do any searching or anything like that. So it'll import it directly into Lightroom. Then what you can do after it gets back into Lightroom is I like to come over to the Effects tab and add a little bit of vignette. And usually I like to play with the highlight slider as well, especially now because I've started to learn what that does. But other than that, adding in your little vignette, calling it good, exporting it with Control Alt Shift and E, or Command Option Shift and E for a Mac. And once that's done, you can look at the before and afters, and hopefully you guys enjoyed, because this is a very, very long process. I did it for each and every single photo. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.